I greatly appreciate the presence of Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and Mrs. Ban today at a time when the UN system and international law is again put to the test. I also welcome President Tomka, Secretary General Siebles, Legal Counsel O'Brien, Chair of the Carnegie Foundation Bernard Bot, Judge Saifi, Mayor van Aertsen, I haven't seen him yet, but he might still join us. And I'm really looking forward to the debates we're going to have this afternoon. If you look back on the era when the Peace Palace was opened, you might be surprised that it was opened at all. Indeed, the signs at the time were very mixed. The period between the First Hague Peace Conference in 1899 and the opening of the Peace Palace in 1913 was one in which statesmen, diplomats and lawyers were grappling with the codification and renewal of international law. It was a time when the heads of state of Russia and the United States gave interstate cooperation an unparalleled boost. Tsar Nicholas II and President Theodore Roosevelt helped make both peace conferences a reality. And it was a time when private enterprise went hand in hand with public leadership, as witnessed by Andrew Carnegie's gift to the international community, the building next door. But it was also a period of continual conflict. In Europe, tensions were brewing that would culminate in the battlefields of the First World War, whose outbreak the world will commemorate next year. And while the economy back then displayed a degree of globalization that now seems commonplace, the business of warfare was globalizing rapidly too. The 19th century had already shown that modern warfare was no longer a European monopoly. There were hundreds of thousands of casualties in wars across the Atlantic. Civil War, the War of the Pacific between Chile, Bolivia and Peru, and the Paraguayan War. The colonial project in Africa and Asia reached its climax too. European powers learned that colonialism was not without risks and that there were limits to the expansion of empire. And apparently sometimes there were no limits to European cruelty in those parts of the world. New technologies for waging war emerged, like the airplane and the submarine, raising new questions for the law of war. New phenomena like civilian internment and ethnic cleansing foreshadowed alarming developments. This seemed to be something that we see in all times. The law is always later than military developments. For instance, now we're actively thinking about ways of handling the new element in warfare, which is the drone. Also here, law is still in development, and we need to develop it further. In short, diplomacy aimed at promoting peace went hand in hand with the steady dehumanization of war at strategic, tactical, and operational level. To quote Charles Dickens, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It is no less surprising that the Peace Palace survived the Second World War intact. After all, the evacuated palace was a site of resistance activity, which in fact was at odds with the court's neutrality. The surrounding area was also used as a missile launch site and suffered bombardment itself. Resistance worker Kok van Paassen printed the underground newspaper Je maintiendrai on mimeograph machines in the Peace Palace. Another resistance fighter, Wim Bersenbrugge, photographed a V-2 rocket in the gardens of the Peace Palace, ready to be launched at Britain. And on the 11th of April 1944, the palace was on the flight path of an Allied precision bombing campaign against the central population register located in the Villa Kleikamp, only 200 meters away. There's a bank at the same site. So looking back on the past 100 years, it's both surprising and gratifying that the Peace Palace itself and the ideas of its founders are still alive and well. In the context of the time, the initiative by the Russians and Americans was truly visionary. They knew that the proliferation of new weapon technologies alongside rising defense budgets would pose inherent dangers, fuel international tensions, remove barriers to war, and make warfare more horrible than ever. They believed that stricter and more systematic rules for the law of war, accompanied by a system for the peaceful settlement of disputes, could keep these dangers in check. It's worth observing here that both the Permanent Court of Arbitration and the International Court of Justice work on the basis of very old but very sound instruments. For the PCA, it's the Hague Conventions of 1899 and 1907. The ICJ is governed by the statute annexed to the UN Charter, which corresponds closely with the 1922 statute of its predecessor, the Permanent Court of International Justice. Fortunately, we can see that these instruments have withstood the test of time without any problems. And other methods for the peaceful settlement of disputes included in the UN Charter, such as mediation, are still alive and well. The instruments we have are good. The point is that the world needs to make more use of them. We must continually make sure that the system can respond adequately to the problems we face today. At the end of the day, it comes down to a lack of political will, not a lack of instruments. If we look at Syria, where horrendous atrocities continue to take place, we have to be honest, we are not there yet. The people of Syria dream of a life in peace, and we need to continue our joint efforts to help them achieve this. The Netherlands is committed to a peaceful future for Syria. I think all of us are facing at home the questions of our children when they see the atrocities on television and asking us, what are you doing about it? And of course, action should not be inspired with the simple need for action per se, but should be inspired by the wish to provide for the children of Syria the same peaceful environment our children find obvious and accept as a reality from day to day. And I believe this should be inspiring us to look for ways of solving this problem. And I know fully well that there is only a negotiated solution to the fundamental problem we face in Syria. But I also know that an international legal order that is incapable of action when there is such flagrant violation of the most fundamental principles of this international order will weaken itself not by action but by inaction. And we have to be very aware of this when considering the steps we need to follow. And I will repeat here what I just said in the press conference. I applaud the leadership of Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. He was courageous last week. He pulled it off when he got the inspectors to have a mandate to go to Syria to make this investigation. And I think we owe it to the Secretary General, we owe it to the UN system, and we owe it to the international legal order that we let the inspectors do their jobs and report to the international community, and we take it from there. I think we still need to improve in the way forward, the mechanisms for peaceful settlement of conflict. And I hope we can talk about this today. The world is a village indeed, but it's not a village where the rules apply in the same way to all people. I see three ways forward. We need to encourage countries to recognize the ICJ's compulsory jurisdiction. As members of the United Nations, we recognize the ICJ as a principal organ of the United Nations. In our view, recognizing its jurisdiction is a logical and necessary next step. Secondly, we must help countries realize how useful and flexible arbitration is as a way of settling disputes. The Security Council and the General Assembly could draw parties' attention to this instrument more often, and perhaps we should also advocate it more in the public debate. Finally, we must reduce the obstacles to the peaceful settlement of disputes by making alternatives like mediation available. That's why the Netherlands is enthusiastic in its support for the UN's Department of Political Affairs and for NGOs that promote mediation. Of course, we don't achieve our goals with these steps alone. As I said before, the basis of everything is political will. Elihu Root, I don't even know if I pronounced his first name correctly, Elihu Root, Theodore Roosevelt's I can pronounce correctly. Elihu Root, Theodore Roosevelt's Secretary of State, once said, and I quote, "The matters in dispute between nations are nothing. The spirit which deals with them is everything." It is that spirit which we must cherish and encourage. Mr. Secretary General, let me reiterate, I am deeply honored by your presence. In the past year, you've put the peaceful settlement of disputes back on the agenda. Please let me join you now in signing the statement.